We'll move to our next presenter. This will be our first presentation from one of our sponsors. And so with that, I'd like to welcome Kate Lyden. She's going to present on academia and industry working together to advance real-world digital measures. And quick intro on Kate. She's the Chief Science Officer at VivoSense, an agile end-to-end solutions company measuring patient outcomes by developing novel digital endpoints from wearable sensor data. Kate has extensive and diverse background in the development and implementation of wearable sensor methodologies across clinical, academic, and industry settings. She is passionate about leveraging the power of connected sensor technologies to gain meaningful insights into real-world patient behaviors and experiences. Prior to joining VivoSense, Kate spent nearly 10 years as an academic researcher, and you heard Patty mention that a moment ago, focused on synchronizing continuous measures of real-world behavior with physiological signals to reveal associations between important health behaviors and risks for chronic disease. She has authored more than 15 scientific publications on the objective measurement of human behaviors and is a frequent contributor and collaborator on this topic at clinical development, commercial events, and industry working groups. Kate, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Jeremy. So I feel like I already have one win because my camera is on. Let's see if I can also successfully share my screen.
We got it. Just need to go into presentation mode. There you go. Perfect.
All right. Okay. Well, so thank you, Jeremy, and thank you, Actigraph, for putting on this event today. I am happy to get the opportunity to speak on a topic that is definitely a personal soapbox of mine, and it has been for the past couple of years. So excited to be here. So as Jeremy said, oh, you guys can see this. Let me get rid of this. Okay. Better. All right. So VivoSense, for those of you who aren't aware, we are a science and analytics company. We essentially function as a core lab for wearable sensor and remote monitoring technologies in clinical trials and healthcare. And so beyond my affiliation with VivoSense, I don't have any real conflicts to disclose, but because this talk is a bit of my own personal soapbox, I thought it was appropriate to disclose that I am biased and I am opinionated, but I am willing to change my mind, so that's good. But these biases and opinions are primarily based on my own personal experiences. So I've now been in industry for the better half, I guess, of my career. I've worked previously at consumer wearable device manufacturers as well as research grade wearable device manufacturing companies. In academic research, as Jeremy said, my research focused on developing methods to process data from different types of wearable sensors and studying physical behavior and bioenergetics and the risk for chronic disease. I continue to try to maintain one foot in the academic community by having adjunct faculty positions at both the University of Massachusetts as well as Colorado State University. So my motivation for this talk today is that there's clearly, in my opinion, a shared interest between the academic and the industry communities in developing and validating actigraphy-based real-world digital measures. My goals for this talk are really to set the stage for the panel that's going to follow me from a high level. So I'm briefly going to touch on what I believe the motivation is for these two groups in this shared interest, where the overlap lies between these two groups, what the opportunity is moving forward, and how do we find the common ground to work together and ultimately advance the field. So if we come at this from an academic perspective, as Patty mentioned, there's a lot of folks that have been at this for quite a long time. What I have on the screen here is examples of large federally supported efforts that convened experts in the field of physical activity and health from a public health perspective. These efforts are really geared towards identifying and determining the optimal dose of physical activity to improve health. So these meetings happened, the first one I have here is in 1995, 2008, and then 2018. And the goal for these, again, was to identify the exact amount, type, and frequency of physical activity to improve health. And so after convening these experts, I have here a couple of quotes from these meetings in which the executive summary always included a quote such as, improvements in physical activity measurement methodology are needed. Uniform data collection is needed with respect to the type of physical activity and physical activity characteristics. Technologies have the potential to greatly improve the accuracy and reliability of physical activity assessment in free living populations. So from the academic world, the goal was generally to improve the measurement of physical behavior so that we could develop public policy or develop broadly supported recommendations for physical activity. From the industry perspective, this community really started at this quite a bit later than the academic community. What I'm showing on the screen here is an infographic from pharma.org, which illustrates the risks and failures of bringing a drug to market. So in their 2018 impact report, the Tufts Center for Drug Development estimated that of all the drugs entering the clinical trials, only about 12% resulted in approved medications. And this takes roughly 10 years to go through the entire R&D process at a cost of $2.6 billion. So looking at these numbers, it's not hard to understand why many folks suggest that pharmaceutical R&D is the most high-risk business with the highest failure rate for any new product candidates in any industry. And what's more is that for many prevalent diseases, Parkinson's disease, for example, there are currently no approved drugs to slow, reverse, or stop the progression of the disease. We have drugs to improve symptoms and manage symptoms, but no drugs to stop the progression of the disease. And so recognizing this, in 2016, Congress passed what's called the 21st Century Cures Act, which was a bill designed to help accelerate medical product development and bring new innovations to patients who need them faster and more efficiently. And this really marked this shift from the FDA in systematically putting the patient at the center of all phases of drug development. And so the Cures Act really opened the door for using real world evidence, such as the data collected from different types of wearable sensors, including actigraphy sensors, to be used in drug development and really modernize the way that we conduct clinical trials. So where's the overlap? In my estimation, there's many intersections between academia and industry in this field. But the point that I really want to drive home today is the desire and the need for both of these communities to develop accurate and precise measurement technologies that can be used appropriately for whatever their application might be. So what I'm sharing on the screen here is the paper authored by Jen Goldsack, who will be on the panel following this. She's the CEO and founder of the Digital Medicine Society. And she, along with other collaborators in the pharmaceutical industry, developed this validation framework called the V3 model for determining fit for purpose measurement technologies. The first phase of this validation framework is verification, which is the evaluation or demonstration that the sensor signal coming out of the sensor without any processing is valid and valid over time and across different devices. The second phase is analytical validation, where we're testing the algorithms and the data processing techniques that are applied to the sensor signal. And then the third phase finally is clinical validation, where we're evaluating whether or not the actual measure or output is meaningful and clinically relevant for the given patient population. So in my mind, really the obvious point of intersection where these two groups can work together to advance the field is in collaborating on these first two phases of the V3 framework. In 2019, Sarah Cozy-Keetle published a paper where we put forth a framework for evaluating wearable actigraphy sensors. And this is directly relevant to phase V1 and V2, so the first two phases of the V3 validation process. So this framework for the validation process of wearable actigraphy devices is quite rigorous, and it really follows an iterative approach to developing and validating these tools, starting in a structured laboratory environment. The picture we have on the left here is somebody walking in a motion capture lab where we're very precisely measuring different gait patterns. And then moving on in the middle to a semi-structured laboratory environment where we can use things like portable indirect calorimeters, and participants are performing a different list of prescribed activities. And then on the right, finally, we move into this real world validation process where people are going about their everyday life in their own environment, and criterion measures often include things like direct observation. One of the pictures on the right here shows a participant in her own kitchen being videoed by a research observer that will then go back and annotate this video for criterion measure. So this really is quite a rigorous process this is essentially V2 of the V3 framework. So I think that the obvious opportunity is for industry to leverage the existing evidence and experience that academics have been building over the past, many, many years. And then obviously moving forward, collaborating to conduct this rigorous development and validation. Performing these best practice validation steps are usually beyond the scope of what a pharmaceutical sponsor is interested in doing. But if we work together to do this, we can certainly move the field much, much faster. And I think that this, another soapbox of mine that I won't get on, but this is not a one size fits all approach. We can't continue to develop these algorithms and these data processing methods in healthy populations and then suspect that if we apply them to a disease state with an altered movement pattern or gait, for example, that they're going to work equally as well as they did on the healthy patient population. So I wanted to highlight some work of a friend and colleague, Scott Strath at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, who's been in this field for a long time. And he recently has had a series of funding to answer the question, how does disease state and functional movement pattern impact actigraphy-derived real-world measures? And further, can this information be used to help calibrate our prediction models? And so he is going through this very rigorous development and validation process across a sample of roughly 400 people, including healthy people, patients with multiple sclerosis, stroke, osteoarthritis, and Parkinson's disease. And I highlight his work because in my work at VivoSense, it's very frequent that I will talk or chat with a pharmaceutical sponsor whose work would directly benefit from the outcomes of Scott's work. And so connecting these two groups really just for sharing knowledge, but then also for building knowledge and collaborating moving forward, I think is a really big opportunity for the field. So in closing, I wanted to offer a few examples of ways that I think that academia and industry should move forward working together. I wish that this talk was more about examples of successful relationships that are ongoing right now, but in reality, I know very few of those relationships in this particular field. But I think, moving forward, one of the most obvious examples to collaborate is industry-sponsored investigations. And in my opinion, this needs to be a thoughtful, structured collaboration. It's not as simple as academia, sharing code or sharing algorithms in this open source approach. It needs to be, a relationship that's based on an equitable ROI for both parties involved or all parties involved. The second one is consultancy engagements. This is a more simplified approach with less of a commitment. But I think that both industry and academics should be engaging one another to inform their work. So it's not just industry, seeking the expertise of academics, but academics really figuring out what the use cases are that, they should be trying to support in their work. How does pharma need and want to use these tools, and how does that impact the work being done in study design and things like that in academic research laboratories? And then joint appointments. Of course, this is an area where I am obviously biased, but adjunct faculty positions for folks in industry, as well as in the opposite direction where academics can seek different types of appointments during sabbatical years and things like that, as well as student fellowships and internships. And then this cost sharing or no cost pledges of support. Academic researchers need funding. They apply for grants, most of them federal grants. A letter of support from an industry partner, or even better yet, some sort of matched funding goes a long way in academics achieving funds to conduct this research. And then, sort of the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow is a really developed industry academia consortium. And this could take on a lot of different models, but, I really think that is an aspiration for us to work for. And then lastly, hiring postdocs and academics. To my pharmaceutical colleagues on the line, there are many very, very smart and thoughtful people working on this work currently within academia. They may not have experience in the pharmaceutical industry, but they are subject matter expertise in developing real world digital clinical measures. So I think that, it's definitely worthwhile building these bridges between industry and academic research laboratories. And in closing, I wanted to just put up a few resources. I already mentioned the Digital Medicine Society, as well as, CITI, the Clinical Trials Transformation Initiative. And then on the right here, I have a paper that was authored by members of the Digital Medicine Society, reviewing the academic research on clinically relevant digital measures. And if you haven't read this paper, it really nicely outlines the areas where we're really lacking in research and where academic research laboratories could support the work being done in the pharmaceutical industry. So with that, I will thank you very much.
Thank you, Kate, and appreciate the overview, and you've set a great kind of foundation and fundamental place for us to start our discussion on this next panel. So thank you as always for contributing some really good information there. I appreciate you taking the time to do that.